Oh, what's this?
Hearts?
You're actually not supposed to have that.
What?
It
says inscription on it. What do you mean?
Just don't take that, okay?
This is Daniel Mullins, one of the most popular game developers in the world right now. Is it because he attacks his fans without warning? Well, kind of. What we're seeing here is Daniel Mullins acting as a game master. You might have heard of his most popular game, Inscryption. Devoted fans know that the game did not end at roll credits. Mullins embedded clues within the game that pointed players all around the internet. At one point, those clues led a group of intrepid gamers to Stanley Park in Vancouver, British Columbia, not too far from Mullins' house. Mullins, going well above and beyond the role of game developer, came out to meet them. When he got there, Mullins surreptitiously dropped a floppy disk for his players to find. They found the floppy disk, and then Mullins attacked them, making the viewers at home just absolutely freak out.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Wait, so he dropped the floppy disk on purpose, but then he got mad at them for picking it up?
No. Mullins is doing two things at once in this scene. Mullins, the game master, wanted them to find his clue, but it was important for the story he was telling that this disk seemed forbidden and dangerous. So he just pretended to attack them for the camera. This is what Daniel Mullins is about. Creating stories within stories, crafting meta-narratives within his games, where what is and isn't part of the game expands forever outwards. But how did he become the master of meta? And who cares? I mean, who even is Daniel Mullins?
Daniel Mullins' first game as an indie dev was Pony Island. The game is centered around a simple, infinite runner. You control a pony as it runs and jumps on the screen. It's pretty innocuous. My first thought when I saw this game was of that classic Adult Swim unicorn runner. I was surprised though. I couldn't find Mullins referencing it as an inspiration anywhere, especially given that Mullins first got interested in game dev by making Flash games.
And then eventually I got into using computers and I was doing stuff like using Flash to make simple Flash games in that like Newgrounds era, but like never posted any online, and they were even worse than the stuff you'd find there. But
though they maybe aren't his proudest achievement. Instead, he cited Portal, Motherlode, Frog Fractions, Undertale, and Binding of Isaac, which is a pretty large list of very different games. What inspiration did Mullins take from a classic Flash game about digging to hell, a fake edutainment game, a puzzle game with a snarky antagonist, and an action roguelike? And how did that inspiration turn into a game about ponies? Pony Island isn't really about ponies. The infinite runner levels make up only about a third of the game, generously. Pony Island is actually about being trapped in an arcade afterlife where you're forced to play a game Satan made about a sweet little pony. Unfortunately, Satan isn't a great developer. You can't even start the game when you boot it up the first time. You have to go into the options menu and select the Fix Start menu option. Obviously, I mean, why didn't you think of that immediately? And then the Start Game button gets replaced with this mysterious icon, and clicking it takes you inside the game to a coding puzzle. Only after completing that puzzle are you able to play the Infinite Runner game, which is pretty straightforward and honestly the least fun part of the game. These two steps, 1, playing with the options menu, and 2, completing coding puzzles, represent the other 2/3 of the game. These puzzles act primarily as stage gates between the different versions of Pony Island the Infinite Runner game, while the options menu is only one example of the bizarre meta soup that Mullins has cooked into the game. Pony Island was a huge success. Some of the biggest gaming YouTubers at the time played it on day one, and a lot of the major gaming outlets covered this bizarre little game shortly after. This gave Mullins, a new indie dev at the time, a lot of heat and free press for the game. And why wouldn't it be a success? A GLaDOS-like snarky antagonist, a Motherlode-inspired duel with Satan, gobs of Christian mythology like Binding of Isaac, and meta winks to the audience like Undertale and Frog Fractions. It took the best ingredients from all its inspirations and managed to make something wholly unique out of them. After Pony Island came out, Mullins immediately began work on his next game, but he quickly found himself mired in decision paralysis. He wanted to top himself, but he kept wondering, will this decision lead to a better game than Pony Island? And it was making him a little crazy. So he put down his work in progress, and like Archimedes in the bathtub, he found his next idea while taking a break. But instead of shouting Eureka over a mathematical principle, it was his next game, the Hex. And instead of jumping naked from a bathtub, it was watching a Quentin Tarantino movie. What if, instead of the Hateful Eight, it was the Spiteful Six? We open on a stormy night in a tavern. Our host, an older man, greets us. And he's acutely aware that he's a video game character. This inn is for washed-up video game characters, after all. He gets a phone call, and with it, some shocking news. One of his patrons is planning to commit a murder. Tonight. And it's up to us to solve it. The Hex takes a lot of what worked about Pony Island and ramps up the ambition. Do you like fourth wall breaks? Well, the Hex begins with a direct address to the player. Did you like very different games in the same story? The Hex features 6 video game characters, all from very different but recognizable genres, and you're gonna play them all. The Hex is a fascinating entry in the Mullins ludography, because it seems, at least to these researchers, that it was enabled by Mullins' long-time interest in game jams. Game jams are community-led events where participants try to complete a game, usually over a weekend, and often there's a voted-on winner. Entries typically don't take more than 20 minutes to play through, and usually they're even shorter than that. Mullins has been an avid game jammer for over a decade. In 2020, he won Let 'em Dare, the world's largest game jam. He proudly keeps many of his entries available for free on his itch.io page. And this list of games is like a fossil record of the kinds of ideas and concepts Mullins has been playing with throughout his career. Not only that, but Pony Island and Inscryption both started as game jam games. And while I didn't find evidence that chapters in the Hex were ever game jam entries, their short, episodic nature makes them feel a bit like game jams that received an extra post-jam polish. His most popular game jam entry is probably Sacrifices Must Be Made, the precursor to what would eventually become Mullins' most successful game to date, Inscryption. Inscryption is a roguelike deck builder, but it's also one of the most effective horror games I've ever had the opportunity to play. It doesn't rely on jump scares, it relies almost entirely on dread. Terror, as Stephen King describes it. Inscryption takes place in a cabin in the woods on yet another stormy night. You sit across the table from a shadowed figure. Only his eyes and occasionally a gnarled hand are revealed to us. This figure tells us to play and teaches us his card game, Inscryption. When it arrived on the scene in 2021, this game took the indie world by storm and managed to break into the mainstream, topping year-end best games list, selling over 1 million copies on Steam alone, and winning multiple awards. People really like this one. So what did Mullins do with Inscryption that made it orders of magnitude more popular than his previous titles? One reason? The mechanics. Mullins showed that he had storytelling chops, with both the Hex and Pony Island. But in both, the gameplay feels fragmented. They're games made up of smaller games. Each one is fun, but bite-sized and contained. For Inscryption, he showed us how much he'd grown as a game designer. Inscryption's primary game mechanics center around a brilliantly designed and addictive card game. This change in focus is most obvious when comparing play testing processes for the games. Before releasing the Hex, he had his playtesters answer questions about stories and character.
I don't hear a lot about people playtesting the narrative. You kind of often write a story and that's that. But I found that by asking if they had questions regarding the story or timeline or world, they would often have major confusions that I didn't realize people weren't understanding. So a moment that was supposed to have emotional impact would kind of fall flat.
But before releasing Inscryption, he took a very different approach. He collected feedback about the story, of course, But he also got feedback on the gameplay experience more directly. He asked what card people liked most. He asked about favorite combos, sigils. He even did something he hadn't yet done before. He collected data on a large enough scale to tune the game balance mathematically. This isn't an uncommon practice in game dev, but it can be hard for small, solo devs to pull off. They might not have a big enough pool of playtesters to collect enough data from in order to make statistically significant conclusions. All that work paid off. Inscryption was a smash hit, but it wasn't just good game design that sent Inscryption to the top of Game of the Year lists. There's a lot more going on here, just under the surface. When we talk about a Mullins game, we know it'll bear all his hallmarks, which of course means this game is aware of us, aware that we are playing it. And that means it's gonna play us right back.
Mullins games rely on meta storytelling. Like, half of Pony Island is just logging in and out of Satan's PC desktop. In Inscryption, all the characters are aware they're in a video game, and you're playing a guy who is playing a guy who is playing a game.
Well, technically you're reenacting a Let's Play, and it's of 3 different games that are all invented by characters in the game, plus the ARG.
Yeah, well, so pretty meta. But my question is, what does that get us? Is the game better because of the meta-narrative? Or is Mullins like the M. Night Shyamalan of games? He's got one gimmick, he does well, and someday we'll all get tired of it. Will Mullins one day make a game about trees that are trying to kill you, but then the trees are also making the video game?
I don't know, I might actually play that game.
Well, luckily the Hex is so clear in its meta storytelling that it serves as a perfect case study for us to answer the question, what does the meta-narrative get us? We got 6 video game characters sharing a meta space independent of any of their games. And that's where they conspire to destroy their creator. It's a classic let's kill God kind of plot. You play as each character in their game of origin, as well as in the meta world where the conspiracy is coming together. You're Super Weasel Kid, the carefree hero on a platforming adventure, but also Super Weasel Kid, washed up former video game star. You're Bryce, shirtless punch kicker in Combat Arena X, but also Chef Bryce, part-time cook who's trying to get out of a bad work situation and get back to his passion of cooking full-time. You play both the character and the intellectual property. This duality gives us permission to think about protagonists as more than stock video game characters. We begin to imagine them as complex characters, with hopes and dreams. Their world is expansive. It has possibilities. And then, if you're anything like me, you forget just how meta this game really is, and are surprised when Reginald turns and asks me the player, if I'm satisfied with the ending. These are characters who know about me. I'm implicated. I sure hope they don't, reach into the real world and kill a real guy. Oh. So now it feels like a lot of things are possible. It's a neat trick, and I really enjoyed that part of the Hex. But I have to admit that I liked this meta trick more than I liked most of the actual gameplay. I mean, Super Weasel Kid doesn't even get hurt when he falls on the spikes, because he keeps getting saved by his mole father figure. In fact, we literally platform on a Steam review saying that they don't care if it's possible to die in this game. It's just a little more focused on the meta concept than the game feel. So does that make it a cheap gimmick? You might be surprised to find the answer in this pipe. No, not that pipe. This pipe. Okay, I lied. It's not really a pipe. In fact, it says right there in plain French, this is not a pipe. It's an image of a pipe. This is a famous painting. It's called The Treachery of Images by René Magritte, 20th century surrealist painter. And he's not just being a smug little This painting is part of Magritte's large body of work playing with and questioning imagery and representation. That's right. Get in, loser. We're going to the museum. Many of Magritte's paintings play with the same ideas as The Treachery of Images. He always seems to be thinking about what we see when we look at paintings. Like, literally what hits our eyeballs, and how does our brain deal with that? In a 1965 interview, he said,
"Everything we see hides another thing. We always want to see what is hidden by what we see, but it is impossible."
He's talking about how there's a ground truth to what we can actually sense. We see colored brushstrokes. And there's a world we can imagine when we look at the painting, guided by those brushstrokes. In his essay, Surrealism in the Sunshine, 4, Manifesto Number 2, he expands on this in a more philosophical way, using that tried and true formula, the numbered list. Number 1. Everything takes place in our mental universe. By mental universe, we mean everything we can perceive through the senses, feelings, reason, imagination, intuition, instincts, or any other way. Okay, here he's laying the groundwork for this idea that there are things we know about, either because we see them or hear them, or we think them. He calls this the mental universe. When I look at a painting, my perception of that painting is in my mental universe. Here we see the bowler hat, the apple, the background, and the brushstrokes. These are all in my mental universe after I see the painting. Number 2. It is impossible for us to have anything except the mental universe. Example, it is impossible for you to have any sense of this writing that is penetrating word by word into your mental universe except from your mental universe. Okay, it gets weird now. Magritte is trying to talk about how we can know things that we don't know about.
We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know.
He points out that, as you read, you can imagine there is a next word, but until you read the word, you don't know it. Just like how, as you watch this video, you know I will say another word, but until the video gets to that part, it's not in your brain yet. For example, in this self-portrait, you'll note that we don't see his face. His face is not in our mental universe. Number 3. The notion that the amental exists is the only notion we can have concerning the amental. The mental world in which everything takes place leads to the existence of the amental, which we can say nothing about, except that it exists. All the qualities we may attribute to it would be applicable, since these qualities would be from our mental universe. Harshness, light, outer, inner, movement, etc. These qualities are only applicable to objects which are part of our mental world. Here he brings it all together by saying that even though we like to think we can imagine things about the unknown, what he calls the amental universe, we're tricking ourselves. Because as soon as we imagine a concept, that concept is actually now in our mental universe, as imagination. Whatever is still unknown is still out there, doing its little things, being completely unavailable to us. What we have is a conceptualization, which is useful and meaningful to us, but technically not the same thing as knowing the unknown. We can imagine he has a face. We can even imagine what it looks like. But that face is just a conception. His actual face, if it even exists, is entirely amental. Its truth is unknown to us. Magritte goes on to argue that, because of this, the way to expand our appreciation for the amental is to be extremely honest with ourselves about what our mental universe is, and watch its boundaries very carefully. He develops this idea more in his piece La Condition Humaine. Whoa. This is cool, because Magritte is showing you that it's a painting in a painting, but also showing you how seamlessly the line can blur between the inner and outer paintings. Does the real world really melt into the painting so seamlessly? Is the painting blocking something else that is actually there? Is there no reality behind that painting at all? Everything behind the painting is amental. The only things available to us in our mental universe are the brushstrokes that we see and the ideas we imagine about what we don't see. By bringing the nature of images into question, Magritte creates space for our brains to consider our own perception. What is it like to perceive the world shown in a painting? How is it different than perceiving the real world? How is it the same? It's mind-expanding. So, remember video games? The Hex is also art inside of other art. When we go from Combat Arena X to the Six Pint Inn, it's like we're zooming out of one painting to show you that it's inside of another painting. Just like a Magritte painting points out that it's in a painting, the Hex can't stop pointing out that it's a video game. By highlighting its video gamey nature, the Hex recontextualizes your gameplay experience. It brings the amental parts of our experience, playing our favorite franchises, into the mental. Super Weasel Kid acts as a representation of a 90s platformer game, like Sonic or Spyro, the same way that this is a representation of a pipe. This brings all the tropes we know and love about those 90s titles into focus. We become aware of them as part of our mental universe. Upbeat soundtracks, bright visuals, jumping for coins, or donut rings, or whatever. And an edgy sequel, complete with skateboarding. But where there is a mental world, there is an amental world. And Mullins wants us to consider the amental. We jump on Steam reviews as we platform, and the comments reflect the response many of us had to those edgy sequels. Disappointed and unenthusiastic. By including the player reactions into the game, making Mr. Shrewd's exhaustion and limitations part of the text, and depicting the pollution Weasel Kid's world has experienced, we are forced to consider the amental aspects of our experiences playing the sequels to 90s platformers. What happened outside the edges of the screen that we couldn't see? Audience expectations, changing interests of a changing demographic, the environment of the industry becoming more corporatized and designed for profit, rather than play and exploration. All of these factors led to the design choices that made sequels like Spyro 2 and Sonic 06. But, to us as players, these factors were all amental. When Spyro hopped on a skateboard, we may or may not have been thinking about the recent success of Tony Hawk Pro Skater. A lot of us were too young to be making those kinds of connections. Each section in the hex invites us to take the amental and make it mental. When Lazarus from Secrets of Legendaria gets reassigned to Vicious Galaxy, it emphasizes the brutality of his new game. We see beyond the genre conventions to the on-screen depiction of a really awful, bloody war where a lot of people die. Lazarus doesn't want to be a part of it, and neither do we. Chef Bryce just wants to cook, and they've made him a fighter. How would you feel if you knew that you were IP, able to be sold off? Would Blanca be happier just cooking pão de queijo in his native Brazil? Similarly, Secrets of Legendaria invites us to think about crunch. Wasteworld invites us to think about launching AAA games in near unshippable, highly buggy states. Walk reminds us of the fine line between inspiring and pretentious. The Hex is a unique experience. It uses meta-storytelling to simultaneously depict the games industry's worst tendencies, while also celebrating the history of games as a whole. Interviews with Mullins don't indicate an interest in Magritte-style metacognition. He just seems to be making what he wants to make without worrying too much about why. Which rules, and I love it. Make the game that feels like the right game to make, you know? One thing that's obvious from the Hex, Mullins has a deep appreciation for video games. And, through the lens of meta-storytelling, he invites us to appreciate these games with him, warts and all. And even if he isn't consciously trying to be the Magritte of video games, there's still a lot we can learn from the comparison.
Objection.
Yeah.
What if I don't like one of the games? Like I don't like the actual gameplay.
Okay, shockingly hot take. Not every gamer likes every game. And to love all 6 of these very different games equally, that would make you a rare breed. Jesse Schell breaks games down into 2 essential genres. Head games, focused on strategy or reasoning, and hand games, focused on reaction time or performance. And Mullins purposely designed the Hex to be a 50-50 split. Super Weasel Kid, Combat Arena X, and Vicious Galaxy are the hand games, while Wasteworld, Secrets of Legendaria, and Walk are head games. And even within each group of head and hand games, gameplay is very diverse. Walk is intended to parody the, hopefully, profound experience of something like Beginner's Guide or Firewatch, while Wasteworld is all about strategy, planning, and cold, hard logic. Very different experiences. It would be totally reasonable to love one and reject the other. Switching to different games with different characters every hour or so is jarring. While the Hex is an innovative game, for me it fails to maintain a sense of immersion within the gameplay world. I think you could even argue that the Hex is anti-immersion. It holds you, as a player, with a special status, constantly pointing out the difference between you and the characters you control. It regularly emphasizes that player and character are 2 different entities, and as it winks at you with plot points ripped from Game Informer headlines, it takes you out of the game world by reminding you of the real world. We've talked about how these Magritte-style tricks tickle the metacognition brain region, but it can also inflame the disappointment spleen. Inscryption will remedy your disappointment spleen.
Immersion happens when games create an effective illusion that I'm not at a keyboard, but I am actually in the world of the game. Horror games especially rely on immersion. In order to scare, they require us to believe we are trapped in a horrific situation with the player character. We often think this means we need to believe that we've become the character in the game. But that's not really what immersion means. More accurately, the game needs to convince us that our selfhood, our agency, our sphere of influence does not end at the boundary of my physical self. I no longer end at my hand on the mouse. I must believe that the entity that is me extends into the game, that the game is part of me. It's kinda like, you ever see Evangelion? Now, a lot of this has to do with the third impact, but in 3.0 plus 1.0, thrice upon a time.
So, Inscryption showcases Mullins' ability to manipulate our sense of selfhood for greater immersion. Consider this. Pony Island and the Hex foster immersion by letting you know, from the very first moment you turn the game on, that the game is aware that it has a player, and it addresses you directly. In Pony Island, we can't start the game without fixing the start menu, and so the game acknowledges it has a start menu, and it requires you, the player, to interact with that start menu not as a tool to begin the game, but as part of the game itself. In the Hex, the game begins with a brightness adjustment step, where one of the characters prompts us to, quote, adjust the brightness until you can barely see my face. It's a small thing, but so much is contained in this sentence. The video game character is aware that there is a you, and that you might need to adjust your gameplay settings, immediately indicating their awareness of the player and that they exist in a game for the benefit of that player. Incidentally, this is how I like to begin all my conversations with people. Please adjust my volume until it's normal.
You. Who is you? Is he talking about us? We see a hand on the screen. I believe this is me. It's revealed in the language I use when I talk about the game. I play a card. I end my turn. I don't say, the character in Inscryption plays a card. The character ends their turn.
The character accidentally misclicks a card and gets really annoyed with themselves.
I refer to that representation as the first person. Though in the fiction of the game, Leshy appears to believe he's talking to someone sat across a table from him, rather than a player behind a screen. He seems to be referring to the body attached to this hand, a first-person character. This is a departure from Mullins' previous games, which both begin by admitting knowledge of a player.
I'm implicated!
Which, as we said, creates a greater sense of immersion. Here in Inscryption, we're presented with more and more layers between us and the character playing the game as the plot unfolds. If we measure immersion as our proximity to the player character, this should make our sense of immersion weaker. And yet, for me, it's Mullins' most immersive game to date. Why? By focusing on the physical realities of the game's various representations. Let's crack a book for a second.
That's right. Get in, loser. We're going to the
library.
Take a look. It's in a book. A reading rainbow.
Dr. Bettina Bodie creates a useful taxonomy for what she calls representation space. I'm going to briefly summarize Gameservatory's video, which is in turn a fantastically concise and entertaining summary of this topic. But what we need you to know for today is that representation space is all the stuff you see on the screen.
Ooh, very mental universe.
And there are two types of representation space we're going to talk about today. One, representations that contribute to the story world of the game, like all the rocks and trees in Skyrim that make you feel like you're in a forest. I'll call these physical representations. Two, abstract representations that contribute ludic information to the game, like a quest marker on a HUD telling you where to go. I'll call these ludic representations. When designing Inscryption, Mullins took inspiration from Hearthstone, an innovative title for digital card games. In Hearthstone, the cards announce their arrival when summoned.
I can be very persuasive.
And they jab at the other side of the board when they attack. These playful touches make Hearthstone feel more dynamic and interactive than its predecessors. Mullins borrows these same techniques. Cards strike out at their opponent. Some of them even have a few things to say. But he took Hearthstone's innovations a step further by removing the HUD entirely. This was an explicit challenge he made for himself. way back when Inscryption was still a game jam game. There are no numbers on the screen, and everything you see before you physically exists in the world of the game. Any numbers we need to know about exist on the cards we hold in our hand, or are otherwise represented by physical objects. While Hearthstone displays health as a number in a small box on the screen, our mysterious game master prefers to use teeth. Each hit is represented by a single tooth, and it plinks onto the scale with tiny but meaningful weight. He could have used tokens, marbles, anything, but he chooses teeth to represent your life in his game. Even though they're just gold teeth, not actual bone, we can't help but think of our own teeth.
I'll tie bones, never forget teeth, I'll tie bones.
They're inside our bodies, and they would be painful to part with. As they plink onto the scale, we are given a physical reminder in space and in body that we are here, flesh and blood, and at the mercy of our game master. And if that didn't drive the point home, we have the first-person visceral experience of using pliers to remove a tooth and placing that real tooth on the scale. And greater sacrifices yield larger gains against our opponent. We might crudely gouge out an eye, which carries the weight of 5 teeth. But this sacrifice isn't real. These are just 3D models. It's not my eye, it's the character's eye, right? Even when we try to reassure ourselves, reminding ourselves that these are just representations of physical reality, Mullins undermines us. Cards, for example, are supposed to be ludic representations. It's not a squirrel, it's a depiction of a squirrel.
Here's the stick, and here's the porcelain replication of the stick.
However, should we choose to sacrifice the squirrel, the card shakes with fear. This ludic representation, this piece of paper, has the capacity to fear? Should we choose to sacrifice it, we hear the slicing of a blade and see blood spurt from the card. Did we just kill a squirrel, or have we destroyed an image of a squirrel? Blurring the line between physical and ludic representation serves to also blur the line between us, the player, and our physical representation as a 3D model of a hand holding cards.
This is very similar to La Condition Humaine. An image inside of an image can blur the lines of reality in interesting ways.
So true, my talking hamburger friend. This is Mullins going meta again, but in a way we haven't really seen before, at least not to this magnitude. By blurring the lines of reality, Mullins makes the gap between squirrel and squirrel card smaller. Even scarier, the gap between me and my physical representation in the game feels ephemeral at best. Having closed the gap between player and character, Mullins goes in for the kill, quite literally. One of the most iconic moments of Inscryption is losing. Leshy blows out your last candle, expresses disappointment, and his hands slowly begin to reach across the table towards us. Did he just kill us? He didn't have a weapon, so the brutal image of him tearing us apart with his bare, gnarled hands might flash across your mind before the lights come up, and we're not dead. Yet, we're on the floor. You can almost feel the cold, hard wood beneath your body. The lighting has changed from a warm, fiery glow to a fluorescent, inhuman white. We are asked to do what is actually one of my favorite parts of the game, to create a card. We select its attack, defense, and sigils from the deck we just accumulated, but we are asked to name the card after ourselves. Ominous. Leshy then asks us, once again physically, hand him his camera, and we see the flash. And now, we have become just another representation. The line between physical and ludic representations is not just blurred, it's blast wide open, at the cost of your life. The design ethos of putting physical realities at the forefront of the game experience permeates even the tiniest design choices in the game. Once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. The physical smoke from the candle becomes a representation on a card. We pluck a clover from its representation within a painting and bring it into the reality of the cabin. The scribe's powers are all based around destructive transformation of the physical into representations for use in their little card game. There are so many fascinating little choices underscoring the messy crossover between ludic and physical representations in the game. If one comes to mind that I haven't talked about, I'd love to read about it in a comment, because despite staring at this game for what feels like an eternity, I'm certain I'm missing some really cool examples. We think of being touched emotionally and physically as two very different concepts, but maybe they aren't.
Being touched, in the sense of being moved emotionally, signals the very real experience of something immaterial, pressing itself on our emotional state and changing it, and the capacity for us to touch someone or something else in a similar way.
Inscryption reaches out to touch us in order to frighten. Inscryption Act 1 does not end with a game over screen. It ends abruptly.
Oh my, I think I just beat him! Oh.
For a moment, we sit in the dark, confused, and then... a memory card. This is where we're formally introduced to Luke Carter. Luke Carter is a YouTuber.
I'm implicated!
Who opens up old collectible playing card packs, looking for rare finds. He's found a few old packs of Inscryption at a garage sale, and we join him as he makes a video opening these packs. Over the rest of the game, we'll watch this poor man slowly become obsessed and lose everything to Inscryption. Mullins is bringing back a familiar tool he's rehearsed in prior games. Like Pony Island's Infinite Runner closed to reveal a desktop, Inscryption's cabin closes to reveal live action footage. Like when the hex indicated an awareness of the player, Inscryption introduces us to the character we've been playing as, long after we've become comfortable inside his skin. Once again, Mullins is inviting us to consider what exactly about this game exists in the mental and, more intriguingly, what kind of old data lurks in the amental. By playing hacky sack with the difference between ludic and physical representations, Mullins has made something intensely compelling. The story of Inscryption is about the fragility of reality. The game's finely tuned mechanics have propelled us here to meet Luke, and we're now going to watch Luke lose his sanity over the exact game that we think we've mastered. The rules of the game we think we know are about to blow wide open in the next act. This explosion will invite you further into the depths of the game, and you might find yourself relating to the obsessed Luke, going over and over both story and strategies at all hours of the day. You might have heard the phrase ludonarrative dissonance before, when the experience of gameplay clashes with the game's narrative elements.
Lysander, I've come for your head! So you finally made it, Dennis. Did you weep when you watched Archibald bleed to death? You'll pay for what you've done. It's time to finish this once and for all! I look forward to stomping on your corpse. Ah!
Inscryption, instead, leverages its gameplay design to amplify and harmonize with the narrative elements. We call this ludonarrative consonance. The player finding themselves relating to Luke Carter as we both become obsessed with Inscryption is ludonarrative consonance. The gameplay and the narrative are building upon one another and emphasizing one another's themes. Designing for ludonarrative consonance is not really a new idea, and there are bountiful examples in other games we could pull from. Stardew Valley, for example, makes me think about how communities and gardens are both things you cultivate slowly over time and require real work and attention. However, Inscryption has achieved a depth of ludonarrative interaction I haven't experienced before. And this depth is achieved in two ways. First, a healthy injection of meta-elements into the narrative causes us to question how far the reality of this game extends. Second, innovative game design choices shake our confidence in understanding the difference between ludic and physical representations. Together, these factors make Inscryption a potent horror game, and horror, as a genre, serves an important purpose. If sci-fi allows us a safe, removed place to contemplate philosophy, politics, and social constructs, horror allows us that safe space to contemplate matters that are less cerebral and more animalistic. While Star Trek might muse about the true value and purpose of wealth by introducing us to a utopia that has ascended beyond currency,
There's nothing here but worthless gold.
Inscryption invites us to consider what role obsession plays in our lives. It seeks to evoke a specific affect within us and examine what that affect means to us. But if that was the whole goal of the work, how do you end it? Inscryption ends in a graveyard. We're given one last puzzle to put together Luke Carter's epitaph. Here lies Luke Carter. On solving the puzzle, we advance. We meet the scribes one by one, playing intentionally buggy versions of their games as the game slowly deletes itself. We learn that Grimoire's style of Inscryption involved moving around a chessboard. Magnificus, meanwhile, plays Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yu-Gi boy!
It's honestly really cool. And one of the most common questions Mullins gets asked, will you ever make full games out of these vignettes? The answer, almost definitely not. Sure, it's disappointing, but I agree with him. It's the right choice to make for the sake of the story being told. Luke Carter meets his end after being fully consumed by his obsession. In the final clip, a woman, supposedly from the company that released Inscryption, shoots Luke, and we watch his blood pool beside the camera. A playing card gently floats. Luke is dead. Inscryption isn't just about the fragility of reality, and it isn't just about obsession. Inscryption is also about endings, and it reaches out to grab our hand and presses it against those endings, to feel them. What's to be done? Nothing. We live through our obsessions. Sometimes our obsessions start to live through us. And that's when the fragility of our reality becomes achingly apparent.
Daniel Mullins has achieved something, specifically with Inscryption, that no other dev has. He's created a ludonarrative experience so tightly woven together that it is nearly impossible to say where one begins and the other ends. This was only possible after years of exploring related ideas in his other games. His work since Inscryption shows he's still developing and maturing his ideas. BitBuddy was a small one-off release after Inscryption you can play for free. It's a play off the desktop buddy malware that was so pervasive in the early 2000s. It's a fairly simple experience. You take care of a little Tamagotchi-like buddy and they beg you not to close the window because they'll die. It's funny, it's tragic, and it's steeped in meta. It reminds me of the central conflict at the end of Inscryption. Should the scribes delete the game and themselves with it? But given the intimate relationship between the player and Buddy, BitBuddy digs deeper into his tragedy than Inscryption was able to. Meanwhile, Solipsis is another small Mullins release as part of the DreadX Horror Collection. It's about an astronaut who, not unlike Luke Carter, is losing his sanity as he observes impossible events on the moon. The primary game mechanic has you mold justifications for the bizarre goings-on by throwing them against the side of the screen to break off the sharp edges and force yourself not to believe your own eyes. We have ludic representations, badges representing the character's ideas. However, instead of blurring the lines between ludic and physical representations, Mullins goes a step further. He blurs the lines between ludic representation and a regular old physical object, the edge of your monitor. As of the release of this video, Mullins has announced he will be making Pony Island 2, Panda Circus. In the trailer, I saw some classic Mullins shenanigans that I am very excited about. FMV is living next to 3D modeling, is living next to pixel art.
Classic!
Our POV character is explicitly depicted as being the player of a video game.
Classic!
A Russian doll of realities in an ever-expanding mental universe.
So classic.
What I'm most excited to see is where Mullins takes his craft to bring us something that will once again shake us to our core.
See you at the circus, clowns.
Thank you so much for watching. This video has been a labor of love for about 6 months now, on and off, so it's really cool of you to check it out. Huge thanks to our quote readers, that's Aeronoc and Mistia Celeste. And how about that animatic at the start of the video? It's pretty good, right? That was made by Doqmeet, who's extremely talented, along with Aeronock and Misty Celeste. Please check them all out. If you really liked this video, the number one thing you can do to support the channel is to just go watch another video. There's some on the screen right now. Wow, technology. I always find ending these pretty awkward, so I'm just gonna head out. All right, you have a good one now. Bye-bye.
Just cut out this part.